Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. So, welcome to an evening with Lynda Rutledge, who is the author of this year's Coronado Community Read, West with Giraffes. If you haven't read it, it is a fictional account of a true story that was discovered by the author while doing some research on San Diego Zoo. She's got a great local connection here. Lynda was commissioned to write the history of the San Diego Zoo for its centennial in 2016. And then during that process, she uncovered this fascinating story about two giraffes that were transported across the continent from New York to San Diego in 1938. And she's taken that and made this, touching and amusing novel, which we're going to hear about tonight. And after the presentation tonight, if you still want to learn more about Lynda and about the book, and about our other community read events, we've got brochures at the back, so please take one. And Lynda's also going to be available to sign copies of the book if you have it. And if you don't, she can sign a book plate for you. You can go get the book at Bay Books or wherever you like and stick that in there, so that'll work for you. But I would like to thank the Friends of the Library for this event. And in particular, Sharon Sherman for making it possible. And so, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from her home in Austin, Texas, just to be with us tonight, Lynda Rutledge.
So, anybody here like giraffes? I have to tell you, I am over the moon, and for to be here for many reasons. But I'll tell you two. One of them is this is the first. Is this on? And
You have
to go closer. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm used to the classroom. I'm used to gesticulating, so this may go flying. I'm really happy because this is my first in-person event. I've done quite a few Zooms, but it's because of COVID and the way the world is. And this, in fact, it came out in February of last year, 2021. And I didn't even have a launch party. We didn't even have fun back then, of course. And as you'll find out, and maybe it's already apparent, I'm a bit of an extrovert. So it was driving me nuts, that y'all may love Zoom, but oh my gosh. So I've been doing lots of Zooms and trying not to look at myself all the time, to please tell me how to, put the guy up there, how that goes if you've done any Zooms. So anyway, the point is, this is the first one. And second, I can't imagine a better place. Make a job. You betcha. And you already know. And I'm so jealous that you get to live here, right?
You can too.
I don't wish. But I have to say that I'm just absolutely thrilled that you chose West with Giraffes for your community read. It's just perfect. And it's just perfect that you are my first to come and get to come back out here. I realized that the other day, I don't know about you, but I think I've kind of lost the last couple of years. I can't believe it, but it's been 5 years since I've been here. I've been in San Diego, and now I say that in the context of I came out here in 1998, and to tell you the story about What's the Giraffes, I have to tell you the story about the story. And essentially that's what I'm about to do for some of you who have already read the book. I put a lot of this in the author's note at the end. And if you haven't read that, or if you haven't read it lately, you'll enjoy this again, I hope. And I hope I don't bore you, but the rest of you, I'd like to just start there. And so what happened really was in 1998, I came out to San Diego. I was living in Chicago at the time, and my husband and I, and I found out that that I had something called seasonal affective disorder, and I didn't even know I did because I didn't know what it was. I just was depressed, and I'm not a depressive person. What the heck's going on? So anyway, I suffered through that for about 11 years. But what I essentially did, I left a lot. I was at that point I was a freelance journalist and a professional writer, and I would and I started I don't know, somehow finagled getting into a lot of travel writing. So I would get to go always going somewhere. 2-3 times a year I would get to go down the Danube for $100 or something. But please bring it on, So I got to do all that, but in my professional writing, which was articles and books, other people's books, ghostwriting, that sort of thing, I would actually, underwrote that. And so I saw the world from there. So I can't really gripe a whole lot about Chicago, although I still will, because it was cold, as you all know. So, anyone that's ever been anywhere but here, this place is perfect. Wasn't that a joke? I think it was a movie. How the weatherman. Someone was playing. Who was it? Was playing the weatherman. That's Steve Martin, of course. How could I forget that? And he was just always the same. And I love that about this place. But in 1998, as it worked out well for me because I ended up falling into a book project for the San Diego Zoo. And interestingly, it was about the visionary zoo director named Charles Schroeder, who was the one that got rid of put the moats in. And, of course, everybody else in the country started taking out the fencing, too. And he also was the one who founded the Wild Animal Park. So that was quite an amazing story. But while I was in these archives, now I want you to picture these archives. We're talking about volunteers over the last 70 years, They would, in these little scrapbooks, like you would, what you'd make in elementary school. In fact, I think I had one kind of like one of them, when I made my, and they were just crumbling. But every page had clippings. So these volunteers would come in, they clipped these things about the zoo. They were all over the country. And I think they probably had a service. And they would send these clips, and they would, they'd copy and paste. Listen to me. This is what the world we live in right now, right? Cut and paste. They would just paste it in there. And so they were just crumbling, right? So as I was doing this, I was, got way mesmerized, and I kept getting off track. I just would read another article that didn't have anything to do with Dr. Schroeder, right? And there was these amazing stories, and one of them was about the giraffes, how they got their first giraffes. Now, I wasn't a novelist yet. So when I started reading it, I was just absolutely mesmerized. Now, this is the zoo. There are amazing stories all over the place, right? I wrote the history. I can tell you all, I could sit there and give you we could have a whole other seminar on that, get together, and you'd love it because of the stories. I'd just be telling you stories. So I, of course, loved that. And but this one was ridiculously amazing. Like movie kind of amazing. And of course I was imagining that. I'm a film buff, so I kind of imagining that, the whole time I was reading these articles, and I just can't believe this was real. It had a hurricane in it. It had if they survived that, then they were put in the back of something that was not hardly even a tricked out pickup truck, and they went cross country, before interstates for 12 days. I recall that when I started seeing this, I kept seeing in my mind, this little farm girl. And now, one of those little interstates, or not interstates, one of those little highways that's doing this, right? And she's bored, and she's looking out her window, and suddenly she sees 2 giraffes go by. And I just, I laughed out loud at that image, and it stuck. And, but I wasn't a novelist yet. I was a nonfiction writer. I was a journalist. So I looked around. I thought, well, maybe I could find a diary from the man who pulled this off. the head zookeeper. His name was Charlie Smith. And maybe I could find a diary, and then I could create a nonfiction book about it. But was no diary, and I realized that zookeepers back then, especially back then, were not the kind of guys who wrote diaries. So I hated it, but I had to let it go. And I actually had this other book to write, so I got back into that. So fast forward, about 12 years, and I'm no longer in San Diego, sadly, and I actually had to go up. My husband got a job in Michigan, which was even colder, thank you, Lord, but we got out of there in about 7 years after that, and got back to Texas, and I had, at that time, I wrote my first novel, and and it's very interesting. About the time I was about to contact my friends at the San Diego Zoo to tell them, I can't remember exactly how it went down. I either was about to tell them or I did tell them about the novel, just because they were my friends, the CEO, and the women and their administrative assistants and that sort of thing. They said, we've just been talking about you. I got an email that said, we've just been talking about you. And how would you like to come back and write the history of the San Diego Zoo for the centennial? Now, this is 2012, it's 2016. Well, I couldn't say yes fast enough, as you might imagine. And as for the next few years, I came back every 2 or 3 months. And about 50% of that time, I had extra time on my hands. When I had extra time on my hands, I drove better.
Somebody's going to put batteries in that.
So, do I need to start over? All back. Thank you. Okay. Where was I? So it's 2012, and I'm now. Is this better? Okay,
Yeah.
Closer. Fine. I'll just spit into it. I'll break out in song here in a minute. You'll be glad. You wish I hadn't. It's 2012, and they asked me if I want to come back and do this, and I came back. Every 2 or 3 months, I would come back, and when I did, more than half the time, I'd come over here, and I'd have a little extra time, and I'd come over the bridge, and I'd dream about how gorgeous it all was, and I'd come down the streets, and I'd go down Orange, I just, and go over to the beach, of course, look at all the fool's gold. Did that the other day, and I loved that. I forgot that part, and I started walking, the power ride. I started walking along there when I got in yesterday morning, and I just tickled. Oh yeah, fool's gold. It's just a special place, and you already know that. Anyway, so what I've done now is what I'm doing now is what I did now at that point back then. I actually started. As I came, had to start writing. I was doing the research. I had all those, all the stories I had lined up. I mean, it's 100 years of stories but I had to stop somewhere, right? But I mean, I just kept going back to that giraffe story. And I just kept being amazed again. And the funny thing about it is, what I do, I loved doing the history of the San Diego Zoo, but it was work. I was being paid for it really and nicely, but it was also work because I was, I had to make everything perfect. Right? There wasn't totally creative. There wasn't any creativity involved because the stories I had to write it well. So I realized I needed some play. I needed to do something to play, and this you have to put this under writers are crazy, because instead of going out, and running a mile or something, or going out and playing tennis or something, I got back on the computer and was writing a story. Actually, I was doing more than that. I was actually trying to craft it first. I actually took the whiteboard. I realized I had to fill in so many huge gaps, and not only did I have to do that, if I was going to tell the story, I would also have to not just fill in the gaps of what I don't know, I'd also have to grasp what it was like to live back then, or it'd be tone deaf, and that meant that I had to embrace the research in a way that would make me understand what it was like to be a woman back then, what it was like, what was the racial situation was back then, just the physical problems that the country was having. I had to learn all about the Dust Bowl, and the Great Depression. Oh my goodness! I realized that this was going to take a while. So that was okay because it was going to be play. I didn't know if I was going to do anything with this. I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know if I could pull it off. But what I love about this is that it didn't stop me. I think this is I think joy is the right word. Anything creative. I bet half of you here are into some sort of creative thing, and you find your joy in the creative process, in some fashion, some way. And I know I'm one of those people. And so, what the heck? I'll work, and then I'll play, and by figuring out my little story over here. And we'll see where it goes. So a year later, this is what it looked like. I guess we were going to wait till the rewriting process, but why don't we show them? Show them what is the whiteboard that I brought it out. Ready? Now, welcome to my strange mind. Can you imagine what the spouse was thinking the whole time I was doing this? It wasn't that big, thankfully, but it was pretty close. And if you'll notice, and again, this was just play. I hadn't written anything yet. I realized before I could do anything, I had to decide what was going to happen and when. So, if we're going entirely across country. Now, I loved, as a travel writer, I loved the idea of a road trip. And I got all excited about that. In fact, that's probably what kept me going. I was taking my own trip, not only on the road, but back in time. And so in essence, what I did was, I always feel like it's backwards. I should have done it from the East Coast to the West, right? But I started over here because, and it's left to right, right? And anyway, so I noticed that so I started here, and essentially this New Jersey, Maryland, D.C., Virginia. You see, and I went on like that. And I tried to decide what was happening each time, and who was it happening to. Now, these up here, these are our three major characters. One of them is the old man, and he is everything green. They look more like blue, but it's supposed to be green. Is things that he did, and of course, red is red. And I asked questions like, "What does she want?" What, and then blue is Woody. What does he want? And then I try to answer it. Before I could go on, I had to decide what is it they want. And really, that's a major question in all literature. I don't want to sound like a professor here, but you have to kind of decide on that before you can go any further with any kind of a story. What is it they really want? And so, if you notice that it's also sort of reminding me of how, I've already read the novel, right? But it was in one town, and it was a smaller world that I was creating. So I had to kind of realize that I had to almost start from scratch in thinking about this whole concept. So I had to get kind of, again, remind myself of how a book's put together. So what you have here, this thing is, you begin with inciting action. You have rising action, which is development. You know, things happen. And then point of crisis, which is the emotional climax. And then you have the denouement, the technical climax. And that was reminding me of that too. So, you know, in all the little adventures we had, I had to balance those with what was happening in the country. So you can see why it took me a year. So, yeah. But anyway, I just thought you might enjoy seeing, again, how crazy a writer's mind is. Right? This is what you think about. This is the way it looks. I'm thinking it's kind of sad but true. Okay. That's probably, Jacqueline, that's probably enough for that. Well, anyway, so what we have, I realized that something happened between, there's another thing, that something happened between 1998 and 2012. Something called the sixth extinction was happening, and we were becoming aware of it. I think it was probably already going on. And I bet you may have heard of this, and I'm hoping, I mean, you live here, right? So I'm thinking you already know about this. If you're not, you know why the San Diego Zoo is now a conservation organization. This is why all zoos, if they beyond menageries, they are all conservation organizations because they really become Noah's Arks. And this happened, this was happening when I was here in the 80s and 90s. You bring in, you bring all these different kinds of species in and trying to save them. And he was trying to learn how to save them. You know, for instance, there's a certain kind of species that they figured it out that, oh, I'm getting off track, but they figured it out that it takes about 200 of them before they can simmer down now and reproduce. So that means you have to have places that are very large, and this is almost impossible. But there are a few here. There's one in the Audubon Zoo has one in Louisiana, and it's they don't let people even go there. They're just all about that. That's what the Wild Animal Park was all about. It's just you don't take animals from the wild anymore. You reproduce them, and you hope to then introduce them, back into the wild, and that's thankfully happening some. Anyway, that's what's happening. So I decided that, okay, it's really nice to have the story of 1938, but what if I could also say something about this, but say it in kind of less than pedantic way, more subtle. And so why don't I make the first person narrator this really old guy, like 105. He's a centurion, and he is on the way out, and he knows it. And what if I actually have it pictured, so much of San Diego is here. I have it pictured as the VA hospital. It's where he is, in San Diego, right there. Because I was always driving by it. And he is in and out. He's, his mind is gone before his body, and essentially, I open with that actually after his death, where the liaison at the time, the young liaison, finds this old footlooker, as you already know if you've read it, and she thinks it's going to be just the same old old things inside it, like uniforms and things like old pictures. And as it turns out, it's all these writings. It's these yellow pads full of the story. So she sits down and starts reading, and that's how this thing starts. And then it becomes the first person narrator of what he wants, and he's actually writing it to someone, and he's hoping that someone will find it and send it to this person. So that's a little foreshadowing. You're supposed to kind of remember that till the end, till you find out. And then you also, are able to, he punches he comes back to himself when he hears it's set in a bit of the future, like it's only a few years ahead from now. And he hears over the TV that giraffes have gone extinct. And that wakes him back up, and he goes over and punches the TV. And of course, then that starts everything, as you might imagine. And he's back in his room, and his hand is bandaged, and he realizes he's going to have to get this down if he's going to ever do it. And he's going to have to do it right now. And so we have some interstitial chapters where we come back to him as he's creating some foreshadowing, attempting to get this down before he is gone. And while we essentially are on this trip in 1938. And we find out all kinds of secrets. Everybody has a secret, you know, which is quite fun. And of course, I had to come up with what everybody's secret was. Right? That's even more fun. But in essence, we ended up at this point. You know, I've been writing it now, and about this time, I heard a TED talk by a man named John Mulan. I don't know if you know him. He's a nature writer, and he, you know, he of course is creative nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, but he had a TED talk that really resonated with me. He said, and just the timing was perfect. He said, storytelling matters, emotion matters, imagination has become an ecological force. Well, that's all I need to hear. So I started writing, and I realized that maybe this, in my small way, that I could make some sort of a difference here. And I tell you what, what I'd like to do now is, for you that haven't read it, I'm going to just read the opening. You know, if y'all, the ones you wouldn't mind hearing it again. And so I'm going to read that and now, and then I'll end up with a few other thoughts, if that's okay with y'all. How am I going to do this holding this? Let me see if I can do it. Okay, you can stand right by me. Let me see if I can put this right here. No, do this.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. All right. Okay, so it opens with hurricane, of course, and I forgot to say this, and I think this will be fun. For you who have read it, you already know this. I not only, when I realized I could write this, I not only could use real people, you know, around the fictional ones, like Bill Benchley, for instance. That would be so much fun. But I could also use the newspaper articles that I'd found. And all I had to do was sprinkle those through. And all I had to do was take a literary license, just a little bit. But just so y'all know, those are real. So that was just absolutely fascinating. And I was feeling like I was a bit honoring the whole thing by adding them, you know? So, so I also used those to further the story. So if you actually looked at those by themselves, you could also see the story of them going across country, and also essentially what was happening a bit, you know, again, a foreshadowing as it went along. So I could use them creatively. So it opens. The first one opens with one called, the headline is Miracle Drafts Ride Hurricane at Sea. New York World Telegram. September 22nd, 1938. And this supposedly, by the way, was the worst hurricane to hit the East Coast before Hurricane Sandy. I think it was as bad or worse at that time. And anyway, so this was real. Miracle Giraffes Ride Hurricane at Sea. New York, September 22nd. Special edition. After riding through the great hurricane that decimated the eastern seaboard yesterday, the SS Robin Goodfellow limped into New York Harbor this morning along with 2 giraffes left for dead. Compiled from September 23rd, 1938, news reports. In one of the few accounts ever recorded of hurricane survival at sea, the merchant marine freighter SS Robin Goodfellow rose straight into this week's cataclysmic storm off the coast of Haiti. Witnesses describe swells blocking out the sky, fish swimming in the air, and winds whipping waves into waterspouts as seamen caught on deck helplessly watched one snatch a crewman into the void. Crawling to the hold where their mates pulled them in, they had no choice but to abandon two crated Baringo giraffes to face the hurricane's full force. Within minutes, the ship went into a half roll starboard and stayed that way for 6 hours of pelting waves and winds, abruptly righting itself as the hurricane passed. On deck, all seemed lost, save for one battered giraffe still standing in its lashed crate. Its companion's crushed crate, found in debris, jammed sideways against the ship rail, with only the gigantic beast's lifeless head in view. But as the crew gathered, pushed the carcass overboard, the downed giraffe stirred and opened its eyes. Prologue. Woodrow Wilson Nichols died in the year 2025, on a usual day, in the usual way, at the rather unusual age of 105, a century and a nickel. The young VA hospital long-term care liaison assigned to dispatch his worldly possessions to survivors, which in Woodrow Wilson Nichols' case was in an ancient military footlocker and no survivors at all, stood in his vacant room. Determined to keep on schedule, she checked the time. Her job made her feel like some gatekeeper of things left behind, especially with centenarians gone long before their hearts stopped beating. They were the only ones with footlockers anymore, and old footlockers with nowhere to go were the worst. Their contents full of mortal meaning departed with the departed as if she could actually see the past vanish into thin air. So she took a deep breath and opened the old trunk, expecting to find the usual musty uniforms and faded photographs. Instead, she found a giraffe. The footlocker was full of ruled writing pads, dozens of them, stacked in bundles bound with twine. Perched on top, with a yellow newspaper article, was the giraffe, a tiny, antique porcelain souvenir from the San Diego Zoo. Despite herself, she smiled wistfully and picked it up. As a child, she'd seen a whole group of the tall, gentle giants at the zoo before they become so horribly rare. Gently setting down the giraffe, she picked up the first batch of pads to move them aside when the top pad's large old-man scroll caught her eye. She eased onto the edge of the bed and read it closer. Few true friends have I known, and two were giraffes. One that didn't kick me dead, and one that saved my worthless orphan life in your worthy precious one. They're both long gone, and soon I'll be gone, which will be no great loss to be sure. But the man on the TV just said that soon there'll be no more giraffes in the world at all, gone with the tigers and the elephants and the old man in the sky blanketing the pigeons. Even as I punched the screen to shut him up, I knew it could be true. Somehow, though, I know there's still you. And there still is this story that's yours as good as mine. If it goes extinct too with my old bag of bones, that'd be a crying shame. My shame. Because if ever I could claim to have seen the face of God, it was in the colossal faces of those giraffes. And if ever I should be leaving something behind, it's this story for them and for you. So here and now, before it's too late, I'm writing it all down with a chance a good soul reads these words and helps them find their way to you. With that, the VA liaison untied the first batch and, forgetting all about her schedule, began to read. I'm older than dirt. And when you're older than dirt, you can get lost in time and memory and even in space. I'm inside my tiny four-wall room with the feeling that I've been gone. I'm not even sure how long I've been sitting here. All night, I think, since stirring from my foggy brain to find myself surrounded by other old farts staring at a fancy TV. I remember the old man on the screen talking about the last giraffes on Earth and rushing over in my wheelchair to punch him. I remember being pushed back here quick and a nurse bandaging my bleeding knuckles. Then I remember an orderly making me swallow a calm down pill I didn't want to take. But that's the last time I'm going to be doing that, because right now, pencil in this shaky hand, I aim to write down one singular memory, fast as I can. I could spend what I feel in my bones as my life's last clear hours to tell you the Dust Bowl, or the war, or the French peonies, or my wives, so many wives, or the grays, so many grays, or the goodbyes, so many goodbyes. Those memories come and go here at the end, if they come at all anymore, but not this memory. This memory is always with me, always alive, always within reach, and always in living technicolor, from deadly start to bittersweet finish, no matter how old I keep getting. And red, old man, sweet wild boy and girl, oh how I miss you. All I have to do is close my worn out eyes for the smallest of moments, and it begins. Chapter 1, New York Harbor. Boats were flying through the air. Streets were flowing like rivers. Electric lines were exploding like fireworks, and houses of shrieking people were being blown out to sea. The day was September 21st, the day of the great hurricane of 1938. The entire coast from New York Harbor to Maine got smacked so hard it was the stuff of legend. 700 souls gone to their final reward as wet as naples. Back then you got no warning. You'd notice a storm over the water and you'd be worrying how bad that cloud looks when the banshee wind and rain hits and you're scrambling for your life. The dog piling I'd wrapped my scrawny young self around got whipped were airborne. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in a ditch with a tramp yanking on my cowboy boots. Seeing me rise from the dead, he yelped and ran. I was still in one piece somehow, black, blue, and bloody, with only my suspenders popped off and gone. So as the rest of the living world began hollering for help or hearses, I wiped the dry blood off my face, grabbed hold of my trousers, struggled to my feet. The boathouse where I'd been standing had blown away along with Cuz, my third prison boss. Found him in a shallow pool of boat shards with sloop's mast stuck straight through him. There wasn't much to look at even before my hurricane wallop, an overgrown farm boy with a face newly scarred and a neck sporting a birthmark the size of state fair prize yam. But I sure looked better than Cuz. I'd say I was lucky, but I hadn't had enough of a relationship with the word to use it. I'd say it was the worst day of my life, yet it was already far from it. I can say this. I never thought I'd see a bigger eyeful than that hurricane as long as I lived. But I was wrong. Because the last thing you think you're going to see in the middle of fit boats and buildings afire and bodies dangling and sirens waiting is a couple of giraffes. Okay, I'm going to end. Oh, I've got to do it over here, right? Yeah, let's see if I can do this. Since this is the library, I can't help but evoking a bit involving a classic writer of American literature, Mark Twain. As I was trying to get my mind around how to tell this story, and knowing myself well that my writing always involves serious topics in a playful manner, I stumbled across this very old afterword of a 1959 edition of Huckleberry Finn that a scholar had written. And it resonated like crazy for me. So I want to read to you. The play of a good story makes you glad you're alive. For art without play makes very lumpen dough. The playful game of a good story may dance you among truths, some of them dirty and painful, where all the same you're happy to go. And it may help you in a manner peculiar all its own to celebrate life. Now, odds are, if you're here, you're an animal lover. So let me add to that the words from the old man in West with Giraffes when he said that life is life, no matter who or what is living it, a thing to respect. If you don't get that, you're just a wasted skin. So to end, I hope that West with Giraffes has you celebrating life, and that in all its incredible forms that share the world with us, and that I hope you enjoy the trip. Thanks.